You're with God, day 91. The reading for today is out of Leviticus, and it has to do with celebrating the Festival of Booths. And in this passage in Leviticus, the writer Moses is going through how the children of Israel are to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles or the Feast of Booths, and the emphasis on it, the importance behind it, in that the Feast of Booths or the Feast of Tabernacles is to remember God's deliverance. And so, the story, every week they would go through or every year, they would go through and they would spend a week living in booths or living in tents. And there were all kinds of things that they did during that period of time. The commentary, they're talking about equating this with worship. And they're talking about this festival being a festival of worship. And they give an interesting phrase here about worship. I want to read it to you. It said, the purpose of worship is to remember that experience, to live in it, to rehearse it and reenact it, and so to bring it into the present. The people can then see that God is still the one who delivers and guides, and can remember to structure their lives on that basis and move into the future with hope. As I look at Old Testament patterns of worship, and I look at the things that God commanded the children of Israel to do, there is the sacrifices, there is the festivals that they were ordered to keep. And in the Psalms we hear a lot about worshiping with music, and all that's great. But in this part of it, in the actual Torah, the emphasis on worship seems to be on retelling, reenacting, and remembering the story of God, and how God's story becomes our story. Basically, the activities that they would do were to, like they suggested here, were to remind themselves of the acts of God, and then in the sacrifices also to foreshadow the story of Christ. So there seems to me, as I read through some of this, there seems to be a correlation between the idea of worship and the story of God, in that in worship there's always this engagement with the story of God. What God has done, what God is doing, like we talked about a couple of days ago, who God is, the nature and character of God that all these things flow from. So there seems to be this constant, it's almost like when I read passages like this, it's almost like the idea of worship is to get us to focus on and indwell the story of God almost, and to make that story our story. And in doing so, to grab a passage from the New Testament, and in doing so, to offer ourselves unto God as a living sacrifice, which is our reasonable act of worship or reasonable service. And that's an idea that's been kicking around in my mind about worship for quite a while, and one that I'm really not sure what to make of yet, but one that seems to keep cropping back up as I reflect on and study this whole idea of what it really means to worship God. So, those are my thoughts on day 91.